The disguised observer, David Chen, adjusted his worn baseball cap as he pushed a cart of cleaning supplies down aisle 7 of Fletcher's Market. To everyone around him, he was simply Jake, the new janitor who started 3 weeks ago. His faded, blue uniform shirt hung loose over his lean frame, and his weathered work boots squeaked softly against the polished floors. But beneath this carefully constructed disguise was the 42-year-old CEO of one of the country's largest retail chains. For the past month, David had been conducting what he privately called his ground truth mission. After receiving countless complaints about employee satisfaction and store management, he decided the only way to understand what was really happening was to experience it firsthand. This was his 7th location, and like the others before it, he had slipped seamlessly into the background, observing the daily rhythms of retail life. Fletcher's Market buzzed with its usual afternoon energy. Customers wheeled their carts through narrow aisles while stock clerks restocked shelves and cashiers rang up endless streams of groceries. But David's attention had become increasingly drawn to one particular employee, a young woman who worked Register 3 with quiet efficiency. Emma Rodriguez had caught his eye on his very first day, though not for any obvious reason. She wasn't the loudest or most outgoing employee, nor was she particularly memorable in any traditional sense. What struck David was her unwavering consistency. Every morning at exactly 7:55, she would arrive, check in with the floor manager, and take her position behind the register. Her movements were precise, her customer interactions polite but brief, and her focus never seemed to waver. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and brown eyes that held a depth that seemed older than her years. Her uniform was always clean and pressed, though David noticed it was slightly too large for her small frame. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to look professional, and her smile, while genuine with customers, never quite reached her eyes. What intrigued David most was what Emma didn't do. While other employees chatted during slow periods, she organized her station. When others took smoke breaks, she helped elderly customers load their groceries. During the mandatory 30-minute lunch break, she would disappear completely, never joining the other staff in the small break room behind the customer service desk. David had initially assumed she was simply a dedicated worker, the kind every manager hopes to find. But as days passed, he began noticing other details that painted a different picture. Emma's hands sometimes trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. She frequently glanced at her phone, checking it with an urgency that seemed disproportionate to typical social media browsing. Most tellingly, she never seemed to eat anything during her shifts. On Tuesday of his second week, David had been restocking paper towels in the cleaning supplies aisle when he overheard 2 cashiers talking during their break. "Have you noticed Emma never eats lunch?" asked Monica, a veteran employee with bright red hair. "I offered her half my sandwich yesterday, but she said she wasn't hungry. Girl's getting too thin if you ask me." The other cashier, a younger woman named Beth, nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe she's on some kind of diet, though I don't know why she'd need to be. She's tiny as it is." "There's something else, too," Monica continued, lowering her voice. "Yesterday, I saw her in the parking lot after her shift, and she was sitting in that old Honda just crying. Broke my heart to see it." David had felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at these words. He had spent years analyzing profit margins, market trends, and operational efficiency. But listening to these women express genuine concern for their coworker reminded him of something he had perhaps lost sight of in his corporate world. These weren't just employees or human resources. They were people with real struggles and genuine care for one another. That afternoon, David made a point of observing Emma more carefully. As 3 o'clock approached her lunch break time, he positioned himself near the stockroom where he could watch her movements without being obvious. Right on schedule, Emma stepped away from her register, but instead of heading to the break room like every other employee, She walked quickly toward the back of the store. David waited a moment, then followed at a distance. Emma moved through the employee corridor with purpose, her steps quick and silent. She passed the break room, past the manager's office, and continued toward the storage areas in the very back of the building. David hung back, watching as she disappeared around a corner that led to the basement storage level. His curiosity, now thoroughly piqued, David waited several minutes before following. The basement level was dimly lit, with concrete floors and walls lined with surplus inventory and cleaning supplies. It smelled of cardboard and industrial disinfectant. Sharp contrast to the bright, clean sales floor above. David moved carefully, his soft-soled work boots making almost no sound. He could hear something ahead, a soft sound that seemed out of place in the sterile storage environment. Following the sound, he rounded a corner and saw Emma sitting on the floor in a small alcove created by stacked boxes of paper goods. Her back was to him, but her posture spoke of exhaustion and something else, something that made David's heart constrict. Emma was holding something close to her chest, rocking gently back and forth. And then David heard it clearly, the soft, cooing sound of an infant. His breath caught in his throat as the full picture became clear. Emma had been bringing her baby to work, hiding down here during her breaks to care for the child. David pressed himself back against a stack of boxes, his mind racing. This explained everything: her disappearances during breaks, her constant phone checking, her refusal to eat. She had been using her lunch money to buy baby supplies and her lunchtime to care for her infant child in this cold, concrete hideaway. As he watched, Emma lifted a small baby bottle and began feeding the infant with practiced efficiency. She whispered softly in Spanish, words David couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear in their gentle tone. The baby, who couldn't have been more than a few months old, settled contentedly in her arms. The scene was simultaneously heartbreaking and beautiful. Here was a young mother doing whatever it took to care for her child, even if it meant eating lunch in a basement surrounded by industrial supplies. David felt a complex mix of emotions: admiration for her dedication, sadness for her circumstances, and a growing sense that he needed to do something to help. But what could Jake the janitor do without revealing his true identity? And more importantly, what should David Chen, the CEO, do with this knowledge? As Emma finished feeding her baby and began preparing to return upstairs, David quietly retreated, his mind already working on possibilities he had never before considered. That evening, David sat in his hotel room staring at his laptop screen, but instead of reviewing quarterly reports or market analyses, he found himself researching local childcare services, employee assistance programs, and company policies regarding family support. For the first time in his corporate career, the human element of business had become more than just a line item in a budget proposal. Emma Rodriguez had unknowingly changed the trajectory of David Chen's mission. What had started as an investigation into operational efficiency had become something far more personal and far more important. The secret revealed David spent the next 3 days wrestling with what he had discovered. Every time he saw Emma at her register, professionally greeting customers and scanning items with practiced efficiency, he thought about that small alcove in the basement where she spent her breaks caring for her baby in secret. The knowledge felt like a weight in his chest, growing heavier each time he watched her politely decline when coworkers invited her to join them for lunch. On Friday morning, David made a decision. Instead of his usual janitorial rounds, he positioned himself in the basement storage area an hour before Emma's typical break time. He needed to understand the full scope of her situation before he could figure out how to help without compromising his cover or embarrassing her. The basement was quieter in the late morning, with most employees busy on the sales floor above. David moved carefully through the maze of stored inventory, following the path Emma had taken days before. When he reached the alcove, what he found took his breath away. Emma had created a makeshift nursery in the small space between towering stacks of paper towels and cleaning supplies. A soft baby blanket was spread on the concrete floor, creating a clean space for the infant. A small insulated bag sat nearby, containing bottles and baby supplies. Most touching of all was a battery-powered mobile hanging from a piece of string, tied between two boxes, its tiny animals slowly rotating in the dim light. David realized the incredible effort and planning that had gone into creating this hidden sanctuary. Emma had transformed a cold industrial space into something approaching warmth and comfort for her child. The dedication and resourcefulness it represented left him feeling humbled and determined to help. At exactly noon, David heard the familiar soft footsteps approaching. He quickly moved to a position where he could observe without being seen, crouching behind a large display of boxed merchandise. Emma appeared moments later, moving with the quiet urgency he had come to recognize. She knelt beside the blanket and carefully lifted a small bundle from what David now realized was a baby carrier cleverly disguised as an employee lunch bag. The infant, a tiny girl with wisps of dark hair, stirred as Emma settled her into the crook of her arm. "Hello, mi pequeña," Emma whispered, her voice carrying a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the harsh concrete surroundings. "Mama's here now. Are you hungry, little one?" David watched as Emma prepared a bottle with practiced efficiency, testing the temperature on her wrist before offering it to the baby. The infant latched on eagerly, and Emma's face softened into a smile more genuine than any David had seen from her upstairs. "I know this isn't perfect, Isabella," Emma continued, using what David assumed was the baby's name. "But Mama is doing her best. Soon we'll have a real home again, I promise." The baby's eyes, remarkably alert for such a young infant, focused on Emma's face as she fed. Emma began humming a soft melody, something that sounded like a traditional lullaby. The scene was so intimate and peaceful that David felt like an intruder, but he couldn't bring himself to look away. As the baby finished eating, Emma gently lifted her to her shoulder, patting her back with experienced movements. "You're such a good girl, Isabella, so quiet and patient. Mama knows this is hard, but we're going to make it through together." David noticed that Emma's own lunch consisted of nothing more than a small container of crackers and a bottle of water. She ate sparingly, saving most of her food while continuing to hold and comfort the baby. The sacrifice she was making became even more apparent when David realized she was likely giving up proper nutrition to afford formula and baby supplies. After feeding Isabella, Emma laid the baby on the blanket and began to play with her, making soft sounds and moving colorful toys within the infant's line of sight. Despite their surroundings, the interaction was filled with joy and love. Emma's laughter at Isabella's responses was the most genuine expression David had witnessed from her. "You smiled, mi amor," Emma exclaimed softly. "Such a beautiful smile, just like your daddy." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, and David saw a shadow pass across her face. "He would have loved you so much, little one. He would have been so proud." The past tense wasn't lost on David, and he felt another piece of Emma's story fall into place. She wasn't just a single mother by choice. She was alone because something had happened to Isabella's father. As Emma's break time neared its end, she began the careful process of preparing Isabella for another few hours of solitude. She checked the baby's diaper, swaddled her snugly in the blanket, and placed her back in the carrier. The mobile continued its slow rotation, providing gentle movement and soft shadows to keep the baby entertained. "Mama has to go back to work now," Emma whispered, kissing Isabella's forehead. "But I'll be back soon. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." David watched Emma reluctantly leave the alcove, her steps slower than usual. He waited until he was certain she had returned to her register before emerging from his hiding place. Standing in the space where Emma had just been, he felt the full weight of her daily struggle. That afternoon, David found himself unable to concentrate on his assigned tasks. Every time he passed Register 3 and saw Emma efficiently serving customers, he thought about Isabella alone in the basement, surrounded by boxes and concrete walls. The contrast between Emma's professional demeanor and the vulnerability he had witnessed during her break was striking. During his own lunch break, David sat in his rental car in the parking lot, staring at his phone. He had the resources to change Emma's situation completely, but how could he do so without revealing his identity or compromising her dignity? Simply offering money would raise questions about how Jake the janitor could afford such generosity. As he pondered the problem, David noticed Emma's old Honda Civic parked several rows away. The car was clearly well maintained despite its age, another testament to Emma's determination to make the best of her circumstances. Through his research over the past few days, David had learned that quality childcare in the area cost more than Emma's entire monthly salary. No wonder she had resorted to bringing Isabella to work. That evening, David called his assistant from his hotel room. "Patricia, I need you to research something for me discreetly. Look into anonymous charitable giving, specifically ways to help a single mother with childcare expenses, without revealing the donor's identity." "Of course, Mr. Chen," Patricia replied. "Should I ask what this is related to?" "Let's just say I've encountered a situation that requires creative problem-solving," David said. "Also, I want you to look into our company's employee assistance programs, specifically what we offer for emergency childcare situations." After ending the call, David spent hours researching local resources, childcare centers, and assistance programs. But every option seemed to require applications, interviews, or waiting lists that wouldn't provide immediate help for Emma's situation. Finally, an idea began to form. It was risky and would require careful execution, but it might allow him to help Emma while maintaining his cover. David opened his laptop and began making discreet inquiries, using contacts he had cultivated over years in the retail industry. The next morning, David arrived at work with a new sense of purpose. He had spent most of the night finalizing a plan that he hoped would change Isabella and Emma's lives without disrupting the delicate balance Emma had created or revealing his true identity. As he watched Emma take her position at Register 3, David felt a mix of nervousness and determination. In a few hours, he would set his plan in motion. Emma Rodriguez had no idea that her life was about to change, or that the quiet janitor she barely noticed had spent the night figuring out how to give her and Isabella the security and dignity they deserved. The morning passed slowly for David, each hour bringing him closer to the moment when he would have to act. But as he watched Emma's gentle interactions with customers and thought about Isabella waiting in the basement, he knew he was making the right choice. Sometimes, David reflected, the most important business decisions weren't made in boardrooms or reflected in quarterly reports. Sometimes they happened in the basement of a small grocery store, witnessed by no one, driven by nothing more complicated than the recognition of one human being's struggle and another's ability to help.